A lie is when you call a thing that it is not. This is what J. Mace III was talking about in his poem, Zone of Rarity, that we just heard. Calling a platypus a duck rather than taking it on its own terms. Pretending that the colonial project which erased indigenous people and enslaved Africans was somehow going to make their lives better, more civilized. Treating transgender people like a joke or a danger. This is calling a thing it is not. J. Mace named some ugly truths in his platypus poem about how power has been wielded and the ways white supremacy culture has upended the lives of indigenous people and Black people and trans people and even the poor platypus. I debated whether to share this poem in our family worship, but many children of color are not shielded from these kinds of ugly realities, and our little ones of all backgrounds, they deserve to hear the truth too. Maybe if we adults can learn to talk about such difficult things with the children, we can learn to talk about it more plainly with each other. I believe telling the truth is one of the most important things we can do if we care about our democracy and our humanity. Truth is one of the highest values of most cultures. The ancient Greek philosophers, for example, lifted up beauty, truth, and goodness as the three ideals of humankind. Perhaps this is one of the reasons that the story of George Washington and the cherry tree remains beloved in American culture. Do you remember this story? As the National Park Service tells it, when Washington was 6 years old, he received a hatchet as a gift, after which he promptly went and cut down his father's favorite cherry tree. When his father found out about it, he was understandably angry and confronted his son, asking if he had done it, to which little George replied that yes, indeed, he had done it. And with those brave words, father's anger melted away and he embraced his son, exclaiming that his honesty was worth more than 1,000 trees. I was impressed as I am by a 6-year-old's ability to chop down a tree. I'm even more moved by George's willingness to own up to his own actions. One of the most ancient prayers still in use today from the Upanishads of India begins, "Lead me from the unreal to the real." Lead me from the unreal to the real. And the powerful force that people like Mahatma Gandhi have tapped? Satyagraha, though often translated as soul force, is more literally truth force. Satya is Sanskrit for truth, and also for that which is real. A satyagrahi like Gandhi is one who clings to the truth, specifically the truth that all are one, that our separateness is an illusion. I believe this power of truth force is desperately needed today. Consider, am I clinging to the truth in my own life? Are we clinging to the truth in our country? I was inspired recently to learn about James Makokas, an Indigenous Cree Canadian. Makokas came out as gay at age 17 and remembers what it was like for his father to struggle with his identity. Makokas's uncles helped his father come to terms with it. The young man continued to forge a path that felt authentic for him. He became a doctor and decided to focus on helping Indigenous LGBT people, and especially people who identify as two-spirit in gender. Makoka sees it as a way not only to help two-spirit or transgender people to be true to who they are, but also as a way to help Indigenous cultures reclaim traditions of inclusiveness that were lost through colonialism, being more true to Indigenous culture. In our reading, poet J. Mace III made a link between the patterns of behavior we see in abusers and personal relationships and these patterns in society writ large. Supremacy always tries to kill things it doesn't understand, Mace wrote. You know, I hear abusers do that sometimes, try to devalue things they don't understand, and call things that they are not. So I may call that gaslighting. They may call it law and order. They may call it civility. They may call it a joke or a trick on them. I hadn't heard this term, gaslighting, until a few years ago. Here's how a Psychology Today article explains this form of psychological manipulation. A person who is gaslighting does so by getting their target to doubt their own memory, perception, and reality. Through persistent lying, misdirection, and contradiction, the gaslighter attempts to delegitimize the victim's beliefs by confusing and destabilizing them. Gaslighting, the article notes, is a tactic commonly used by sociopaths and narcissists, which is to say, people who only care about themselves. Calling things that they are not. Journalists Andrew Beck Grace and Chip Brantley unearthed one such real-life story of things that had long been called what they were not in a podcast series released on NPR last spring. This is the teaser. What if you found out that a story you believe so strongly, something you and the people around you had staked your lives on, what if you found out that that story was a lie? When they started the project that became the White Lies podcast, Grace and Brantley intended to set the historical record straight about what happened to James Reeb, a Unitarian minister who was martyred for his activism in the civil rights movement. They wanted to understand why his killers were never brought to justice. I'll share briefly here what Grace and Brantley uncovered. I highly recommend the 7-episode White Lies podcast for a fuller picture. The scene is Selma, Alabama. It's after the march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge that captured on camera and displayed for the world the brutality of Bloody Sunday, police beating the Black civil rights protesters. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. put out a call for white clergy of conscience to come and join him on the front lines of the movement at this pivotal moment. James Reeb and 2 other Unitarian ministers are among those who answered the call, marching with King on what is now called Turnaround Tuesday. The marchers did not go over the bridge that time. Later that day, after the 3 Unitarian ministers eat supper together and call their wives to check in, they set out on foot through Selma. They're going to the meetup spot where the white civil rights workers will rejoin the Black organizers. But on the way, the ministers are attacked by several local men. Jim Reeb is badly injured and gets taken by ambulance to a hospital. He falls into a coma and tragically dies 2 days later. Dr. King delivered the eulogy at Reeb's memorial, as he had done for Black people who died as part of the movement. But it is the death of a white minister, Reeb, that is lifted up by President Johnson when he declares support for the Civil Rights Act not long after. Now, that part of the story is already pretty well known. What the White Lies reporters discover is what happened next and why. Grace explains. The men who were tried for the murder of Jim Reeb were acquitted by an all-white jury in a total sham of a trial. A counter-narrative sprung up in its wake. A story to blame Reeb's death on the civil rights movement itself, instead of these vicious thugs who attacked the ministers because they saw them as race traitors. And all these white people willed that counter-narrative into existence and let it fester for decades. The white people of Selma, in other words, called a thing a thing it is not. The whole city, at least the white portion, participated in a form of gaslighting, blaming the civil rights movement for a man who had actually been murdered by white racists and for whom justice had never come because of their conspiracy of silence and lies. Selma is still haunted because so many people have not been willing to tell the truth. George Orwell's novel 1984 presented a picture of gaslighting practiced not just by one manipulative individual, nor a community bent on protecting old power structures, as in Selma, but by a national government. In 1984, the reader is tipped off by the way things are not called what they are. The regime's Ministry of Truth actually pumped out propaganda. The military arm of power was called the Ministry of Peace. Its Ministry of Love locked up protesters. The slogan of the government in this dystopian future said, "War is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength." Orwell wrote, "The heresy of heresies was common sense. The party told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. It was their final, most essential command." For me, 1984 is a reminder that societal leaders and even major institutions can employ gaslighting. Whoever does it, we know that this kind of behavior is wrong. True devotee to any religion worthy of devotion does not steal to save the temple. A community that one can feel good about living in is a community that is honest about its past and tries to make amends. A true leader of any company or country doesn't lie and manipulate and obfuscate. One who behaves like that is not a leader, but a demagogue and a fraud. This past week, as the impeachment trial got underway in the Senate, I puzzled, as I have over the last 4 years, over the way that large blocks of voters have stood behind President Trump, regardless of his behavior. Last month, one voice did speak up in the magazine Christianity Today. And actually, I saw today's paper also had an editorial by the same author. And a piece titled, "Trump Should Be Removed from Office," which has proven controversial with its own evangelical readership. Editor Mark Galli wrote this: "The reason many are not shocked by Trump's actions with Ukraine is that this president has dumbed down the idea of morality in his administration. He has hired and fired a number of people who are now convicted criminals. He himself has admitted to immoral actions in business and his relationship with women, about which he remains proud. His Twitter feed alone, with its habitual string of mischaracterizations, lies, and slanders, is a near-perfect example of a human being who is morally lost and confused." Galli also quotes lines from the magazine 20 years earlier, written during the Clinton impeachment, and declares it applicable again today, asserting, "The president's failure to tell the truth, even when cornered, rips at the fabric of the nation." Now, I'm not a regular reader of Christianity Today, and I doubt I would find common ground with the magazine often. But I agree that lies and omissions by the president do great damage to our country and beyond. Unlike Mark Galli, it appears most white evangelicals are sticking with President Trump. One explanation for this is that people are getting the results they want: the Supreme Court appointments and policies related to abortion or other priorities of the religious right. So they are willing to overlook his personal character. But it may also be that many Trump supporters are desperately clinging to the stories he spins as a thread of truth. A later article by the same Psychology Today writer I quoted before, Bobby Azarian, shed some light on this for me. Many psychologists have observed that Trump gaslights his own base. Azarian considers one explanation for why he is able to do it. People who are taught from an early age to ignore what their critical thinking faculties tell them, like many religious fundamentalists, are even more prone than most of us to believe, rather than disbelieve, what they are told by authority figures. Doubt takes more energy, so humans already default to believing a lot. If your brain has been trained to turn away from any skeptical impulses rather than take them seriously, you make an even better target for a manipulator. Even if you start to have doubts later, once you are in deep, with many layers of belief established, it would be hard to risk having it all come crashing down by questioning the person making all the promises that you want to have come true. Someone who already feels precarious in the world might just suppress any such creeping doubts. So what can we learn from all of this about telling the truth? How can we foster more integrity? I'll share with you my 5 takeaways, and I'll be interested if you care to share later to hear yours. First, learn to recognize gaslighting. Don't think that I am immune to this kind of manipulation. Even if I grew up in a more free-thinking environment or have embraced critical thinking at some later point in my life, that doesn't mean I am free of the need for a reliable set of truths. I have my layers of beliefs and hopes too. And so I too could be manipulated by a skillful gaslighter. Remain vigilant. Second, clinging to the truth, satyagrahi, is a practice. I want to actively practice it. Even when the truth is not pretty, I want to hear it and deal with it. Even if it tells me something about myself that I'd rather forget. Reporters Grace and Brantley discovered a 4th man from Selma who had participated in the murder of James Reeb. A man named Bill Portwood, who had not stood trial with the others. Not only had Bill escaped justice in 1965, he did the opposite of clinging to the truth. He had willed himself to forget his own role in the murder. This man lived a long life, but as you might guess, he was not well. He remained mired in the illusion of separation, alienated ultimately even from his own experience. I do not want to be like Bill Portwood. I truly believe that we are all one, and I'm committed to growing in integrity and living into the truth of our oneness, which means sometimes I may have to confront things in myself that I don't like. I'm grateful that I have many supports in my life to enable me to work through hard things. So my second takeaway is cling to this greatest of truths, our interrelatedness, and use it to help me grow. Third, when choosing political leaders, pay attention to private virtues. It turns out we don't know if the story about George Washington and the cherry tree is true for sure. His biographer, a minister named Mason Locke Weems, included the story in the 5th edition of Washington's biography. Parson Weems wanted to teach morality, and the nation's first president, who was already looked up to by many, would offer a fine example. As the Park Service observes, Washington's admission of guilt was proof that his public greatness was due to his private virtues, to which anyone could aspire. So regardless of whether that is a more true tale or a mythical legend, when it comes to future presidents and elected officials, I want to tune into the private virtue of potential leaders, knowing that neither virtue nor deceit remains wholly private for long. Fourth takeaway: honor the truth that people tell about themselves. This is what Dr. James McCocus is doing as a healer among Two-Spirit Indigenous people. Poet J. Mays III asks us to do it too, by calling a thing exactly what it is, not what it is not. That's what Mace called listeners to do at the end of the poem when he said, "I call you." I got the chance to meet Mace when he performed this poem and several other pieces at a UU music conference I attended over the summer. As I think you could sense in the video as well, Mace is a really authentic person, and I think a living example of integrity, living from the inside out and staying true to our deepest authentic selves. He offered a powerful insight into how to call things or people what they are. If I'm not sure what to call someone, I can listen for how they name themselves or ask them what to call them. It's sort of like maybe my name is a platypus, because when I say it, he writes, people tell me that that's not what it should be, when really, my ancestors called me and I responded back, and they told me there is nothing blacker than me calling my own name into existence. So I will refer to J. Mace III by the name and the pronouns that he uses for himself, and I want to try to do the same for other people. And here's my last takeaway. Choose carefully who to listen to. If my own perception is contradicted by official sources, I will not ignore what I witness or the instincts honed through my life's experience, nor any objective sources outside myself. George Orwell's regime in 1984 told the people to reject the evidence of their eyes and their ears about what is really happening, and to listen instead to propaganda. Our own current administration has sidelined a lot of scientists when it comes to things like climate change and environmental protection. I'm going to look to scientists and to expert witnesses of various kinds whose commitment is to the truth more than political or financial interests. And I'm going to trust what my own observations and my own good judgment tells me about people and current events. So those are my 5 takeaways about truthful living, and I would welcome hearing yours later if you care to share them with me. As we go forward, may each one of us grow in our skills of hearing the truth and telling the truth. And in our lives, may we live the deepest truth of our interconnectedness with all. So may it be. Amen.